What is the impulse behind art? Quote, I have to be moved in some way, end of quote, the guitarist Michael Bloomfield said in 1968 on why he didn't like the San Francisco bands of the time. They just don't move me enough. The who moves me, their madness moves me. I like to be moved, be it by spectacle, be it by kineticism, be it by some throbbing on Papa Oh Mau Mau as a chorus a million times over. And that, he said, was why he played. He was saying, in his way, what I am trying to say. Whatever language is the language of your work, if I can move anyone else as that moved me, that Gimme Shelter, Al Pacino's voice in The Godfather, that painting by Titian, moved me from one place to another, from this place on earth to one 3 steps away, where the world looks not the same. If I can move anyone even a fraction as much as that moved me, if I can spark the same sense of mystery and awe and surprise as that sparked in me, then I'm not wasting my time or someone else's time. And this is why, in 1947, Albert Camus said, as plainly as Dennis Potter, quote, there is always a social explanation for what we see in art, only it doesn't explain anything important, end of quote. Most explanations of what we see in art, of what art is, of why people make it, why people pay it any mind, why some art leads to great renown, in other words, fame and memory, and some doesn't, are meant to reduce art to something that can be easily translated back into ordinary experience, that can be easily understood, and most explanations of art are meant to exclude a lot of people and raise up the people who are doing the explaining. This hit home for me a few years ago, reading a collection of essays about Allen Ginsberg's poem, Howl, first read publicly in 1955, published in 1956, with almost every one of them about how the poem had changed the writer's life. This poem changed my life, one writer after another testified, which is why the word I appeared in the first or second sentence of more than half the pieces in the book. I counted. It reminded me of a person who once rushed up to the film critic Manny Farber, one of the crustiest, unsmiliest people you'd ever want to meet or not want to meet, and said, Mr. Farber, you changed my life. I doubt it, he said. Life is not that facile. This poem changed my life, the writer said in chorus. Can I possibly convey, said one, how those words, he was of course talking about the first lines of Howl, I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn looking for an angry fix. An early manuscript that Ginsberg sent to Jack Kerouac on view in the 2016 Paris exhibition, The Beat Generation, had, quote, angry streets at dawn searching for a Negro fix, end of quote, which says that meaning is a game of chance with rhythm spinning the wheel. Quote, moved in me how that cadence undid in a minute's time whatever prior cadences had been voice tracking my life, end of quote. No, he can't. No one could convey anything in writing that impoverishing, quote, whatever prior cadences, end of quote, quote, voice tracking, end of quote. But writer after writer is telling you how the poem changed their lives. That is how it made them writers, which is a kind of fascist vanity, fascist in the way it erases what the writers are supposedly talking about, replacing the Mona Lisa in her frame with themselves. If this poem produced a writer like me, it must be good. It all comes down to that urge to fascism. The critics' match for a Thatcher-era campaign button, real or from a novel, I can no longer remember. Do as you're told. Vote conservative. It comes down to the falsity of knowing as a critic, and all of those Howl writers were making arguments about criticism, about how we make sense of what we see, what we hear, and what we think inside and out of the critical events that make up part of a life. What's best for people, to know that some people are of the best and some are worthless. The urge to separate the good from the bad and praise oneself, to decide what books people ought to read, what songs people ought to be moved by, what art they ought to make. People fight the experience of art. Pauline Kael wrote in her review of Bonnie and Clyde, and so they make a critical response into a set of laws that take away the freedom to respond. Rather than try to fashion critical writing that, like art, creates freedom or reveals the possibility that it exists or even the fear, as the Dadaist Richard Holzenbach said at the end of his life, that, quote, liberty really never existed anywhere, end of quote. It comes down to the notion that in the end, there is a social explanation for art, which is to say an explanation of what kind of art you should be ashamed of. Quote, at Clarksdale, U.S. Highway 49 intersects Highway 61, end of quote. David Thomas of Pierre Ubu sang in 2023 in the band's version of the folk song Worried Man Blues. His voice distant and crinkling, as if it were a transcription from a 1940s radio play. Quote, and that is the crossroads of blues legend. Robert Johnson supposedly sold his soul to the devil. Pablo Picasso never sold his soul to the devil. But a black guy from the Delta, guess that's got to be the explanation. End of quote. It's the reduction of the mystery in art, where it comes from, where it goes, to the facile explanation of that poem made me a poet. That song, that movie, that painting, that piece of writing, that piece of my life made me a writer. As if why anyone is a writer is something that can be explained at all. All I can do is not to disbelieve in the moments when writing happens. As with one day in 1995, taking a daily walk up the steep panoramic way hill behind the football stadium. I was vaguely thinking about a book I wanted to write when an opening scene, complete with setting, characters, dialogue, and punchline, appeared before me as if on a cue card for a skit I didn't realize I was already playing. I went home, wrote it down like a stenographer, it seemed, a completely fictional opening about a set of then obscure Bob Dylan recordings from nearly 30 years before. Though when, for me, criticism reaches its highest pitch, the borders between fiction and fact can seem to dissolve. In the dressing room in London, the guitarist was looking for a melody. He picked tiny notes off the strings until they fluttered, snapping in the air. The singer turned his head, caught the tune, the title flashing up. Sure, quote, strange things happening every day, end of quote. Sister Rosetta Tharpe. When was it? 1945? Closing in on Tharpe's own guitar line, the guitarist felt for the syncopation in the rhythm, and the song came to life in the singer's mind. On that last great judgment day, when they drive them all away, there are strange things happening every day. She was shameless, the singer remembered. Purer than pure when her mother was alive, backsliding after that. She came onto the Lord's stage in a mink. She had a way with a guitar. She had a way with a guitar few men could touch. She was the Black Church in the Grand Ole Opry. She'd even recorded with Pat Boone's father-in-law, Red Foley, Mr. Old Shep himself. On the other hand, Red Foley had recorded Peace in the Valley, hadn't he? The spiritual that Reverend Thomas A. Dorsey had written as the Second World War began. The sainted gospel composer in earlier days known as Georgia Tom, who'd put his name on Dirty Blues. The singer shook his head. Why was he remembering all this? His memory raced ahead of him. For some reason, he remembered that Strange Things Happening had topped the black charts the same week Hitler killed himself. It was April 30, 1945. The singer was a month short of 4. Sister Rosetta Tharpe was 30. There's something in the gospel blues, she would say years later, that's so deep the world can't stand it. Now he heard the song as if the war had ended yesterday. As if it were the first time he'd heard it, wherever that had been. Off some road he'd never remember anything else about. Like walking from a dream you had to get up and live through. If you want to view the climb, you must learn to quit your lying. There are strange things happening every day. The guitarist was beginning to mumble the words, faking them, getting only the title phrase. The singer grinned as he made for the door. Strange things happening every day, he said. She got that right. I didn't write another word for 3 months. I wasn't worried. I knew the book was already there, biding its time.